Welcome back to PJ Takes 5. Today is Tuesday, July 29th, and Happy Gilmore 2 is either the best or worst movie you've ever seen. But today we start with some sad news out of the Cubs with the passing of legendary second baseman Ryne Sandberg. Passed away Monday night at 65 years old following his second bout with cancer. A 16-year vet in the MLB, Sandberg enjoyed 15 seasons with the Cubs, and his first season was with the Phillies, and he recorded just one hit, actually in Chicago at Wrigley Field against the Cubs. So really cool moment, starting his career against the Cubs. Obviously, in 1984, the Ryne Sandberg game, hit a tying home run in the 9th and 10th inning, and the Cubs eventually won against the Cardinals in the 11th inning. 10 consecutive All-Stars, 9 consecutive Gold Gloves for Ryno. And then the MVP season in 1984, led the league in WAR, runs, and triples, and he actually led the league in runs 3 different times. But obviously a huge loss for the Cubs community and for the baseball community in general. Somebody who had developed cancer early in 2024 and then had beat it, and then it returned, in a lot worse state, it sounds like. So a lot of people had him in their thoughts in recent weeks, going to Wrigley with the 23 jersey on and everything, but really sad stuff. And I'm sure, as the week continues here, we're going to see more and more kind of outpouring of support from the Cubs and the MLB and just the baseball community in general. And then locally in Chicago, the Score does their 24-hour cancer fundraising event, and that's coming up here pretty soon. So I know he was part of that event last year and kind of shared everything that the well wishes meant to him in his recovery. So it'll be a lot different, a lot more somber without him. So, terrible moment. Just wanted to say, thinking about him and his legacy, but also obviously his family. I know he left behind a bunch of children and a wife and a few grandchildren as well. So really sad stuff from the Cubs. Looking back on the diamond here in recent days, over the weekend, Cubs rallied after that disastrous Game 1 against the White Sox to take the crosstown rivalry, won Game 2 6-1 and then 5-4 on Sunday. So to take the 2-1 series after being down 0-1 was pretty big, and just to get some bragging rights in the city was huge. And then Monday night, heading to Milwaukee to face the Brewers, obviously for that NL and NL Central race, a very important series. Lost that first game 8-4. So kind of had to, similar position where got to win 2 in a row to take that series and to regain the first seed in the NL and the NL Central, like I said. So we'll be paying close attention to that series. And then obviously the trade deadline coming up Thursday. Big news with Eugenio Suarez hit by a pitch on Monday night during the 9th inning. The initial x-rays came back negative, so it doesn't look like there's going to be any lasting damage, but there's still a little bit of concern about what he's going to look like, heading into the end of the week and then, in weeks following. The third baseman, one of the top trade candidates, he's got 36 homers on the year, which is tied for the 4th most, I think, with Schwarber. And then for the Cubs, kind of a prospect they've been watching, obviously with Shaw kind of coming into his own a little bit at third base, maybe pumping the brakes a little bit, but still an area where you could add Suarez and move people around and have a little more position versatility while adding another big bat. And then the other part of the trade deadline for the Cubs is definitely that starting pitcher spot. Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen for the Diamondbacks seem to be available. Mitch Keller with the Pirates, and then Sandy Alcantara with the Marlins, and even Shane Bieber might be in play. So probably going to pick up, one starting pitcher here you would expect to join that Boyd and Imanaga rotation. They've been pretty desperate to add that big arm, so we'll see if anything kind of comes together. I've been kind of on the stance of you don't want to give up too much for a player who's definitely more of a rental, which is kind of the problem with Suarez at third base, but it's one of those pitchers where you don't know if you're going to have them beyond this season alone. So hopefully they're smart with how aggressive they are. Obviously you want to win a World Series, but want to make sure that you have that stability moving forward with a big enough core that you can have this kind of similar success year in and year out. And then the last big Cubs nugget, they extended president of baseball operations Jed Hoyer to an undisclosed multi-year deal. So he's been around for a while. He's going to stay around for a while more. Big part of kind of how this current team is constructed and the moves they're going to make at the deadline here. So I think it's a good thing that he's back, all things considered. Moving on down here, we got Bryce Harper was involved in an altercation with MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred. So this story comes from Jeff Passan at ESPN. Manfred meeting with all 30 teams multiple times, throughout the past couple of years. And it was kind of broached the subject of MLB salary cap, and Harper got nose to nose with him reportedly and said, quote, "Get the F out of our clubhouse," if they were going to talk about implementing a salary cap. So that's been a big hang up between the MLB and the MLBPA. The MLB and the owner side is adding a salary cap, kind of brings the top teams down a little bit and pushes the bottom teams up a little bit more, so it's more competitive overall. And there is a lot of credence to that idea, but Harper and many players in the PA in general sees it as kind of punitive to maybe the top players of earning less just because owners in smaller markets are unwilling to kind of go out and spend the money like that. So definitely an argument where both sides have something to say that's true. I would lean a little more on the player's side that it's probably not the best time to get a salary cap involved and kind of limit what these guys can earn on the open market. But Harper was pretty definitive in that meeting. He reportedly was sitting quiet in a chair holding a baseball bat for a while, which is a pretty scary image, pretty intimidating. And then at one point said that the players, quote, "are not scared to lose 162 games. So bringing up the idea of a holdout, the CBA currently runs through December 1st, 2026. So that 2027 season is kind of a marker of a potential holdout. And then Manfred kind of, trying to prevent a holdout potentially over the next couple of years, kind of said that he was, quote, "not going to get the F out of the clubhouse." Teammate Nick Castellanos kind of stepped in and tried to defuse the situation a little bit, but this is just a small glimpse into the tension that it does exist between the MLB and the MLBPA. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's still a decent amount of time out. I think Manfred's done a lot of kind of legwork to try to meet with these teams and meet with these players and see it from all sides and lay the foundation of a good relationship. But at the end of the day, if the players as a whole don't feel like they're getting everything that they could on open market situations, it'd be pretty rough to imagine a world where they agree to a salary cap. I know the MLBPA has vehemently opposed this idea since its inception back in 2022 when a 5-year CBA was negotiated. And this has really, been going on longer than that, about 30 years back when the World Series was canceled as the players held out. So an ongoing, decade-long kind of back and forth that, if I had to guess, probably ends with no holdouts and no salary cap, kind of the players getting what they want as they should. But we'll see. Obviously, whenever you have a player aggressively kind of stepping up in a meeting like that to the commissioner, it's definitely a story and one that probably wouldn't happen in other leagues. Definitely not in the NFL or NBA, you can imagine. So kind of a unique story coming out of the Phillies there, and one that will have ramifications as we kind of move further and closer to the deadline to renew the CBA and make sure that we're playing baseball in 2027. And then moving on the list here, we got some training camp notes. So we're well into camp for all 32 NFL teams. Just a couple notes coming out of some different camps. Starting in Denver with the Broncos, they signed receiver Cortland Sutton to a 4-year, $92 million contract with $41 million guaranteed. Big time receiver, big physical receiver, captain for the team. Last year was his first 1,000-yard season since 2019, so kind of immediately hit the ground running with Bo Nix and that Sean Payton offense. Big part of what they're trying to do and what they're going to get done, and just a veteran leader. As you bring in younger guys, trying to bring them along, you have somebody who's seen it for a bunch of years in a row, like Sutton, to help out with the development. I think it's super important, so good to see them re-sign a valuable piece of their offense. Down in Dallas, the Cowboys, left tackle Tyler Guyton went down with a bone fracture. It was feared to be an ACL initially, but it looks like he avoided the ACL tear, so that's good news for him. Still set to miss about 4 to 6 weeks, but there is an outside chance that he's actually available to play week 1 or at least early in the season. First round pick to the team back in 2024, so played a little bit last year. Made 11 starts actually at tackle, so an important part of what they're trying to do. That key starter who's on that rookie scale contract is always important. And whenever you have as much money tied up into a quarterback as the Cowboys do at Dak, super important to make sure you have the pass protection you need. So having your left tackle, obviously a big part of that conversation. So hopefully for his sake and for Dak's sake and just the offense in general, he can be back in the fold pretty early here. Going up to Cleveland, big quarterback competition, kind of a four-way battle there between Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. Kenny Pickett actually injured his hamstring last Saturday, and there's no timetable for his return as of right now. So, losing out on reps. Joe Flacco is kind of taking over as the number one quarterback and kind of absorbing some of those reps. And he was with the team back in 2023 with Kevin Stefanski and a lot of those same pieces kind of still around. So he made 6 starts with them, including that playoff game that season. So just being the veteran in the room kind of makes sense that he's the presumed and kind of de facto starter. But I know there's been a report out that between all those quarterbacks, Pickett, who they got for DTR, and a 5th this offseason, and then Flacco and Gabriel, who was a 3rd-round pick, and Shedeur, who was a 5th-round pick. One of those guys is probably going to be on the outside looking in and could end up getting traded before the preseason's over. Kind of hard to imagine a world where you would trade Gabriel or Sanders just because it's so rare for a team to pick a rookie and then turn around just a few months later and trade them away. So Pickett kind of seems like the answer there as a player who won't be getting the reps, could have some backup value for a bunch of other teams. He was the backup in Philadelphia last year and was a valuable part of the offense despite just being a second stringer, but definitely a higher end kind of number 2 quarterback that a team could potentially be interested in. And then obviously if anybody else were to win the job, that kind of shakes things up. But Flacco, just being like the adult veteran in the room, kind of super important for those rookie quarterbacks, whether you keep 1 or 2 of them. It'd be good to have somebody who's seen it so many times in that room to kind of help them along and have the young players see it from his perspective. So I would assume he makes it. I would assume at least one of the 2 rookie quarterbacks makes it. And that's kind of like between Pickett and the other rookie quarterback, and obviously Pickett just going down with an injury doesn't make his case any stronger in the team. So definitely a situation to continue to monitor. Obviously, with the whole Shedeur saga, there's always been some eyeballs on that Browns QB battle, and it's kind of funny that ESPN Cleveland is out there doing the stats for each practice. That's kind of silly, but not super surprising at this point in the year where people are just super hungry for football to be back. And then going down to Tennessee, the Treylon Burks saga is kind of an end here with the Titans. So they waived Burks following a broken collarbone from Saturday. He was the 18th pick in 2022 when they got a 1st-round pick back for trading A.J. Brown, who the Titans were against signing to a long-term contract. And Burks really disappointed out of Arkansas. A little less than 700 yards in 3 seasons. Definitely not the production anywhere close to what A.J. Brown has continued to put up with the Eagles, putting up 1,000 yards each season, basically. So a disappointing time in Tennessee, and then obviously a disappointing end with getting hurt early in the offseason and getting released in training camp. So I'm sure he'll get picked up somewhere. He'll probably clear waivers just because the team could more than likely get him at a cheaper rate than whatever he's getting paid as a 1st-round pick. But 18th overall pick, you would imagine that some team goes out there and gives him a shot, and it might not be right away. It might be a deal where he recovers, he has to recover from his injury, and then at some point in the season, somebody picks him up. I don't know what the timeline looks like. Obviously a broken collarbone is probably going to take a little bit of time, but talented enough player that probably warrants somebody else taking a look at him and seeing if they can't get a little bit more juice out of that squeeze, but we'll see. He's been one of many Titans highly drafted players who disappointed. Isaiah Wilson at tackle, who lasted probably like 6 games, and then some cornerbacks that they've tried out and haven't really been able to stick. So hopefully they're in a different spot with Cam Ward moving forward. But yeah, disappointing tenure with the Titans, and then into that. And then going up to Pittsburgh with the Steelers. The Steelers released Cordell Patterson, 34-year-old, kind of quasi running back receiver. And he actually announced his own release on Twitter, X, social media. He said, quote, breaking news, Pittsburgh Steelers released old, washed-up Cordell Patterson on his day off, obviously kind of invoking Friday, like how you going to get fired on your day off line. So good that he can have some fun with it. You know, he's done a lot in his career, played with 6 different teams over the span of 12 seasons, so has seen the league from a lot of different perspectives, has been important in different spots. I know he was big in Minnesota, big in Chicago, had some good stretches in Atlanta, specifically kind of playing that running back, catch out of the backfield, put him in at receiver in the slot, have him return kicks. I mean, he's a 6'4" player who's very fast and more physical than maybe you would think, you know, just looking at him. So an interesting player that maybe if he were coming out today, teams would kind of view him as a little bit different, kind of more that Deebo Samuel role of like, let's just get him the ball in his hands, and whether he's in the backfield or out wide, you know, he's just a playmaker. And him, and I think of Ty Montgomery with the Packers a while back, some of those players who were kind of positionless, who were able to strive with the ball in their hands. And I think that is kind of a role now. You know, I think for the Bears, you kind of think about like DJ Moore is kind of in that world of like, he'll probably come out the backfield a little bit, he'll probably just get tunnel screens and slants and drags and stuff. And it feels like a bunch of teams have a player like that. So credit to Cordell Patterson if this is it for him on a great career. And you'll see, you never know, he might get picked up somewhere. Hopefully he does, because he's just kind of one of those players where the league's better when he's in it. And then last training camp update down with the Raiders. Some more information out on the Christian Wilkins situation. So he allegedly kissed his teammate on the top of his head, which made the player uncomfortable. And this happened in a team meeting room, so not like the locker room or anything, but still. Somebody filed a complaint with HR following this event. And then between that and the whole saga with the Jones fracture in his foot back in October, where he got a surgery, and the team was urging him to get a second surgery, and he basically said no. Those events combined, the Raiders decided eventually just to release him. So he signed that 4-year, $110 million contract last season, and then they released him on June 4th, avoiding $35.2 million in guarantees. And then Wilkins filed a complaint alongside the NFLPA, a grievance. So it's a big saga. I think there's probably maybe even more to the story that hasn't become public yet, but definitely kind of a unusual fallout between a player and a team who made such a big commitment just a year ago. So we'll see how this goes. If any more information comes out, obviously we still have to wait to hear back on this grievance and if he's going to get this payout. And we have to see how healthy he is, when he could potentially sign with another team, if any other team is willing to sign him, information we know now, and what other players think about him. He always seemed fairly well liked in Miami, but it obviously doesn't mean that he's incapable of doing anything inappropriate or that nothing inappropriate did happen. So definitely an odd situation, and one that, you know, I know people are kind of keeping an eye on pretty closely. And then moving on down here to just the betting scandal. So kind of a new page in the MLB betting scandal here. Guardians closer Emmanuel Clase placed on non-disciplinary paid leave through the end of August. And he joins teammate Luis Ortiz, another pitcher who was placed on leave back on July 3rd, and is also, you know, through the month of August. So with Ortiz, I know it was about unusual activity on 2 specific pitches. You know, I think first pitches of an inning where he just completely dirted the ball through like a wild pitch essentially, on balls that were found to be betted heavily on them being balls and not strikes. So definitely a situation where it looks pretty obvious that, you know, an insane bet on an insane prop, and then for him to so obviously kind of miss in that way, definitely very suspect. But for Clase, you know, a really good player who should be kind of above this, frankly, 3-time All-Star. But, you know, they're not the only players or the only league to be kind of going through this scandal. I know the NBA and Malik Beasley have kind of been in an ongoing situation where Beasley's under investigation dating back to his time with the Bucks for suspicious behavior as it relates to certain prop bets and everything. And then in the NFL, they had problems mostly with Quintez Cephas, who I know was suspended for a little bit, along with some other free agents, and then Eagles cornerback Isaiah Rodgers back in 2024 were all suspended for gambling on football or gambling on other sports inside the team facility. So obviously, as gambling's become kind of a more legalized and non-criminalized thing, and something that these leagues have like partnerships with, it's just becoming more and more popular. And the line between when you can gamble and what you can gamble on and where you can gamble and all of this information is still being ironed out for professional athletes. But the question remains, like, how does this get fixed in a real efficient way? And I think the biggest opportunity is just to do less prop betting availabilities. The prop betting is where it gets a little funky because you can have players specifically dictate some of those things. You think about like Jonte Porter in the NBA, who's now banned for life. And I think he was betting on things like shot attempt numbers, and there'd be situations where he'd bet the under and shoot a shot or two and then kind of pull himself in the game. So anytime you have something that like an isolated player can control, that's probably a little bit hairy and something that should maybe be avoided moving forward, just because it's so easy to manipulate. It's harder for a player, one player on an NBA court out of 10 people to change the line or the over-under, and same for football and baseball. So I think like the over-under, the spread, money line bets, I think having those available, it's hard for a player to manipulate that really. But just in general, having stuff that can easily be determined by one person probably isn't the best way to continue this relationship between professional leagues and professional players and gambling. And, it's a tough thing that I know has a lot of influence in the real world. I know there's been some talk on the legitimacy of the information available for sports gambling sites and casinos and everything. Information about they can see when a person deletes an app off their phone, or when a person takes a break from it, and they can send in an email offering like free play or match deposits, anything like that. So definitely kind of at the wild west right now for sports gambling, and I think a lot of gambling in general, and something that is gonna face kind of pushback legislation wise in the coming years. But with the players, I think it starts and ends with trying to avoid these super specific prop bets, and especially prop bets that can so easily be maneuvered and kind of messed with like that. And just want to do a couple show notes here. So recording this for Tuesday morning, and this week I'll be moving, so Friday show is going to be a little different, just because I'm not going to be like really settled in by Thursday when I would record. So I know Thursday night's the MLB trade deadline, and then the Hall of Fame game. Friday show won't cover either of those, but it'll be a different kind of like celebration of football with that season coming up. But then by next Tuesday, we should be back to our regular programming here, kind of reacting to news. But like I said, Friday show will be a little different, a little creative. Not so much reacting to any current events, but more kind of pushing out like a more, like I said, creative topic. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. And then moving on down to our media review here. Like I said at the top, Happy Gilmore 2 seems to be a pretty volatile movie right now. I just had a bunch of notes. Obviously, it's chock full of just an insane amount of cameos. A lot of people from Adam Sandler's past movies, a lot of people from the current sporting world, especially the golf world. A lot of new actors kind of joining his movies. Just a lot of different people that are pretty recognizable. So I just wanted to go through some notes that I took watching it, just kind of in order of when they happened in the movie. So first one, in the world of cameos, I thought a really cool one was Cameron Boyce kind of made a cameo when Happy's golfing at the local range, and they're watching a TV in the lobby or whatever, and Cameron Boyce is on the TV. Obviously was an actor who played Adam Sandler's son, and I think Grown Ups too, but has since passed away, so it was a nice kind of nod to him to get him on the screen there. And then I was a little annoyed with their willingness to like splice in scenes from the first movie before they do the callback in the second movie. I thought that was like a little cheap. Ideally, a sequel like this is standalone enough where a person doesn't have to have seen the first one to get everything. And not only does this one lean heavily on your understanding of the first movie, but it constantly reminds you of that by like showing his relationship developing with Julie Bowen's character, and they flash in scenes of that, or like flashing in the old Happy Place. It was just like a little redundant to constantly showing scenes directly from the old movie. I thought that was a little annoying. But going back to like the good cameos, I thought the Bad Friends podcast was pretty cool. Seeing those two up there, Andrew Santino and Bobby Lee, was pretty funny. And then the coach from The Waterboy, who twists his nipples. It was good to see him as like the homeless dude on the beach. I thought that was really funny. There was a scene where Shooter's in the insane asylum and he's reading The Shining and like laughing to himself. That was a really good way to kind of reintroduce that character back into the movie. And then I really wish that one guy they were able to bring back was the OG caddy, the kid that Happy chokes out in the first movie. I think he's now like a psychiatrist. I think he has a PhD from Columbia, so in a completely different world and crushing that, obviously. But one of my favorite characters from the old movie, I always kind of thought he looked like Tintin from the Adventures of Tintin, but it would have been cool to get him in there. I know they bring Will Zalatoris in and kind of pretend that he was that caddy, which was a cool nod to him, but still didn't quite do it for me. Another great cameo, Dan Patrick in there as Pat Daniels, was funny. I mean, he's obviously been in a lot of Adam Sandler movies, so to get him in this one, because I don't think they knew each other for the first Happy Gilmore, but to get him in for like a sports movie made a lot of sense. And there are some good lines, like the crawl of his show. I can't remember them, but some like goofy kind of asides about what's happening in the movie. And then Vern Lundquist as the announcer was also really good. I think there's a good bit where he's like, and now introducing Happy Octavius Gilmore, and the co-host is like, is that really his name? And he grabs the mic and was like, I just made it up, but I thought it sounded good. And they put him in like the crazy kind of three-piece suit with all the neon colors. He was really funny. Good to have him back in the movie. Boban Marjanovic as Drago Larson's kid, the dude with like the nail on his head, I thought was really well done. Nick Swardson as the old-timey golfer who was the first guy to have the hip replacement was really funny. And then the fighting between Happy and Shooter in front of the Bob Barker tombstone was a great callback to that scene where Bob Barker beats the crap out of Happy at the celebrity event. John Daly throughout the entire movie I thought was really funny, kind of nursing the hand sanitizer on the couch, and eventually with Buscemi, and he's terrible at the math the entire time with how much money he has to raise to get Happy's girl into dance school. And then Chubb's son being Huel from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul fame was really cool. I thought they did a good job between him and Boban, just kind of bringing in this son of characters to kind of give respect and a nod to people who have since passed away. I thought they did that pretty well. The Eminem being that guy, son of a character, was a little annoying. I thought that was like the worst one. And he just dies, I guess, in the movie when they throw him into the pit of alligators there in the lake, or crocodiles. But that was pretty bad. And then the one thing I did really like at the end was when Happy has to focus on hitting the ball further, and they put Ben Stiller, Hal's face on the ball. That was really funny, showing how much he really just hates this. And then another great line was at the end when Happy wins, and they kind of cut to everybody in his life celebrating differently. And the guard at the insane asylum where Shooter was is just like, yeah, I can't believe I'm saying this, but you guys are all free to go. And then all the patients celebrate and then run out. So a pretty good movie, definitely not like a serious movie, just kind of like a bunch of fan service, a bunch of cameos. The first movie I thought was so interesting, and obviously predates me, but kind of introduced a new generation to golf in a way where growing up, I think for me, when you talk about golf, it was like Tiger Woods, mini golf, maybe a driving range, and Happy Gilmore. It was such an integral part of how we perceived golf, growing up in the Midwest, not in LA or Chicago or Miami or New York, a place where there are a bunch of ranges. Happy Gilmore was a very defining part of the sport of golf, so to kind of reinforce the idea in today's day and age, and obviously the Maxi League is a very obvious ripoff of the Live stuff. And they had a bunch of golfers. I'm not a golf guy, so I didn't recognize everybody that was in there, but they played the tournament with all those current guys. It was just a really cool way to kind of get back to the idea of like promoting a sport that maybe isn't as popular as the NFL or NBA or MLB. So from that aspect, I thought it was really good. In terms of like being an actual film, there's obviously a lot that kind of doesn't really meet par, no pun intended. But I liked it. I mean, I think many like Sandler fans will like it if you haven't watched it already. Rating wise, I'm gonna give it an 8.3 out of 10. Not a movie that I'm gonna rewatch probably, but like I said, still a fun way to spend like a couple hours. And definitely a bunch of good callbacks to that first movie. And if anything, it makes you want to watch that first movie again, which is kind of the best compliment for it. So that's it for today's show. Like I said, Friday is still a show. Be a little different just because I'm not going to let it sit down and record anything throughout this week. But hopefully you guys enjoy that idea and hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Peace.